1. Some background. When I first met my boyfriend, he was living with 5 others, 6 including him, in a 3-bed house with only 2 of them being a couple. He had to sleep on a couch while D, the main guy, stayed in a room with another guy sleeping on his floor on a mattress. This guy paid no rent and constantly borrowed money from D. Boyfriend managed to scare him out with D's approval. E, the other guy, got his own room, but he was paying the most in rent. The couple finally moved out, and that was a horror show in itself. What with dog and rabbit poop and pee all over the floor, as well as rabbit bedding and all this other crap, it took days to clean just that one room. Boyfriend took that room. Eventually, boyfriend and I moved in together, but I talked him into getting a place with me, a nice little apartment. We gave it up at the end of the lease in order to move back into the aforementioned place with E and D, because much cheaper rent. And we're trying to save up money. D is in need of money. His last few roommates didn't work out all that well, and, well, boyfriend talked me into it. I hate it. I hate living here. D and E are perfectly nice. They are, though D is extremely non-confrontational, which is why he has a freaking piano shoved into one corner of the already full of trash house, from the guy who stayed in his room a year and a half ago now. And E is strange. Not necessarily in a bad way, he just has a tendency to kind of show off in front of me. One day I asked him if he could get his laundry out of the dryer. He went and got his basket, put it on his head upside down, and walked off. When we first moved in, back in from my boyfriend, there was absolutely no counter space. Not to say there were no counters, it actually has a lot of counters. But they were just heaped with junk, dishes, dirty and clean alike, old food and utensils. The cabinets were overflowing with mismatched dishes, and the drawers were filled with shitty pots and pans. That first night, with their permission, we filled an entire fold-out table and underneath with that shit. Got rid of all the bad stuff that they allowed, and tucked away the mismatched crap in a container. The counters were finally clear. They are not anymore. The only thing that is there that is ours is a bag of chips and a bottle of syrup. The bathroom is absolutely disgusting. One of them constantly throws his used washcloths on the ground. There's about 7 in there right now, stiff and crusty. The sink is covered in dried soap and hair, and it's not mine. I cleaned it when I got there, made it all nice and white. Within a month it turned yellow. The bathtub is broke. There's a crack running along one of the edges from the couple that moved out. Boyfriend and I replaced the shower head because it was so filled with calcium, what little water came out sprayed only the sides of the shower. It didn't actually get you. They let dishes pile up for a week before starting on them. It fills both the sinks and most of what free counter space there is. They don't understand the concept of rinsing either. When we first moved in, I was the only one doing the dishes for 2 weeks, which I did every other day in order to have something to drink and eat from, because they immediately began using our dishes. All of them. I don't mind them using the dishes, but I would like to use them too. Eventually, we got onto them about doing the dishes as well. They apologized, said they would. And now it's a once-a-week thing. They go through a number of bowls, plates, and cups each day. We run out halfway through the week. They'll say they'll do them tonight. And by the next day, they haven't been touched, and so I do them. We also had to replace the sink faucet because that was also horribly filled with calcium, and the sprayer nozzle was busted. It is completely impossible to walk through the living room without having to step over something. There's just no room. There are piles of junk lining the walls, a few couches and chairs strewn about. I don't think I've seen either of them vacuum once since we moved in April. The washer and dryer smell like literal shit. I'm still trying to figure out why. Their bedrooms are disgusting too. I don't go snooping or anything, but you can see through the door, you know? They both have clothes covering the floor. E has piles just sitting on the floor despite having a huge dresser and, I believe, a closet. D is the same. But dispersed are used tissues and bottles. Believe it or not, he's got terrible allergies and bad skin. They won't throw out their trash next to their desks in the living room. E's desk and the surrounding area is covered in cans and jugs, while D's is covered in dishes, candy wrappers, and tissues. His trash can is usually overflowing until one of us dumps it. Both of these men are almost 30. Boyfriend got a new job with much more money, and I've convinced him to move. But there's slim pickings. I'm just so tired of having roommates. I'm sick of living here. Update. Guess who's moving? Hint, it's me. 2. I was about to make a whole post explaining all the terrible things my roommate did last year. But hey, it ended up being too long. Here's just some of the more wild things she's done. Tried to convince me to run away this summer before I moved in with her, because I was kind of upset about a home situation. Got upset with me because I refused and said she couldn't help me if I didn't help myself. Made a whole post on Insta about how she had a B12 deficiency that could give her permanent nerve damage, or maybe a rare type of leukemia. Used this to ask me to drive her to her studio at 1 a.m. to bring her pills and candy. She'd never got blood work done. Kept telling me I was too loud when I talked to someone at speaking level on Skype at night, with my door closed, which I found is almost impossible to hear from her room when her door is closed. My high school yearbook epithet was most soft-spoken. I took a rude tone with her when she got home because I had a minor car accident and was clearly upset. I walked a mile in the dark to a busy intersection to retrieve my car's rim plate. She sent me a whole essay about how I need to think about what I say, and that words hurt. I was livid. Calmed down enough to send her a message a few hours later apologizing, but saying I didn't say anything actually mean to her, which I didn't. She camped outside my door and said she wouldn't leave until I opened it and talked to her, crying and screaming at me. Never did her dishes. And I mean in like the coagulated ice cream, your house smells like spoiled milk kind of way. Texted me once after I did her dishes after a few days of them being there, not to thank me, but to tell me I hadn't done them right. Claimed they had been there one day and I didn't know, even though I'd been keeping track. She kept gaslighting me about the cleanliness. I eventually just tell her goodbye and she sends me a whole text about how I'm toxic and will lose all my friends. Got dogs over the winter, didn't tell me. I took the chance to mildly threaten her since there's a pet fee at our apartment, and the last time we had talked she said I was going to get a fee for talking. In my room during finals. She sent me a whole thing about how she had saved their lives and didn't have time to worry about what I would think. Kept texting me over break after saying she would leave me alone to accuse me of doing random things to hurt her. Writing about her on a fiction blog I have, turning her in for the dogs. Subtweeted about me, very obviously. Claimed it was about someone else on Facebook when I subtweeted her back. He has a really rare name and a public profile. Nothing about what she claimed anywhere. He did have a car accident where his car flipped over that day, though. Tricked my friend into convincing me to talk to her after I subtweeted her, saying she genuinely wanted to work things out and was scared to talk to me. Screamed at me for 15 minutes. Told my friends I had PTSD without my knowledge, and told them how sensitive she needed to be around me. She was constantly rude to me, even when we were friends. Said I would just compare her to 2 girls who assaulted me later. She is absolutely one of the most narcissistic people I've ever met. I'm even a little afraid to post this, because I'm afraid she'll find it somehow. Update. I moved out as soon as the school year was done. Apartments around here all have year-long leases, so I couldn't really get out any sooner, sadly. Almost ended up subleasing my place and finding another sublease to move into, but it would have been too much work. 3. Now, first-time poster, not really going to do a story, instead just going to give the details of my old roommate, one of the most angry and emotionally abusive people I ever knew. This is mostly just therapeutic at this point. Don't be, Jewel, me, trans woman. While I mostly have my life together now, I still have so many emotional issues due to years of emotional abuse that I really wouldn't wish this on anybody else, and I've been through a lot of therapy until lately. Completely incompetent when it comes to anything involving social cues and, if not for my sister and a very few good online friends, I'd have fallen apart ages ago. I still get almost physically ill if I think I've upset someone. Rage. Amazingly, He has the almost perfect look of a neckbeard. Massively overweight, doesn't shave most of the time unless his job required it, a smell that made being too close to him horrifying, with horrible rage issues that could go off at the drop of a hat. Now, the first part is what everyone came here to see. What he did that was so neckbeardy. I'll start with why the two of us were roommates to begin with. Up to this point, I had lived with my parents for most of my life. I worked, but I did not have my life together at all. I thought I did, but I had plenty of issues that I just refused to accept that came out over the next few years. The situation at home was getting increasingly hostile and scary, so I jumped at the opportunity to have a roommate and move out. He didn't have a job, but he was going to school and getting financial aid. Later on, he did get a new job, and even helped me get a job in the same area, a hotel desk clerk. After he failed to get his degree, we will go into that later. That was my first mistake. The first major thing was money issues. Now basically what would happen is at the end of every term, I'd end up paying him hundreds of dollars just to survive. Keep in mind I was working full-time at a minimum wage job, barely making ends meet. However, I was, unfortunately, a fairly forgiving person, and I had an emotional need to keep those around me happy. As such, even though I didn't always like it, I'd often end up buying him food and helping him with expenses whenever he was low. A lot. This got even worse when he had to drop out of school and he finally got a job. See, he hated to work, but he needed money. The job we had was also the easiest job in the world. We basically just had to show up at the shift and deal with people. Once I started working there, he'd miss 5 to 6 days a month. Usually, sometimes more. A few times even an entire month. If he got sick, his health was really bad, so he got sick usually every 9 months or so. This often meant he needed me to help cover things like rent and bills. And because a lot of the money ended up going towards paying me back, he ended up not caring about working it because the money wouldn't go to his pocket. One thing that really annoyed me, however, is we'd sometimes rotate buying lunch and stuff. Whenever I went to pick it up, often, but he was paying, he'd refuse to leave a tip. But the moment he went to pay, and was there personally, he'd leave a tip. It really annoyed me because I knew it was just to protect his own reputation. Probably the pettiest thing he did that annoyed me the most. In the end, between him and another roommate who I won't talk about, aside from saying he had an actual mental condition that explained his behavior, I was left with thousands of dollars in damages and have only recently managed to pay it all off. I, of course, still hear from him from time to time, hearing, "I'll pay you back as soon as I get the money." I've never seen so much as a dime. But frankly, the money is probably the smallest issue, and I still consider it a small price to pay to get away from him. Next comes hygiene. He was a really big guy and did not take care of himself or things around him. When he went to the bathroom, he'd pee on the floor and just leave it. The bathroom was almost wrecked because of this. They had to tear out the floor and everything. There was always this nasty smell that seemed to permeate outwards from him. He had these weird bubble things around his neck. I think they were caused by dirt and other stuff. And then there was what he did in the kitchen. Whenever he cooked, he liked to destroy the pan he used. I'm talking leaving a thick black crust on the bottom, not even trying to soak it. And then getting mad at me for not being able to clean it when it was my turn to wash the dishes. I'm still not the best cook in the world, but I've never left that bad a burn on the bottom, and I do soak my dishes when I use them. There'd often just be this smell, which I could probably identify, but I really tried not to think about it, and I still don't, that permeated the house. He had a complete disregard for other people's property as well. For example, I let him use my car a few times. Big mistake. He loved to take it on the bumpiest roads he could, just because it saved him a bit of time. Now keep in mind my car was not in the best condition, and he was by himself, over the weight limit of the car. When I realized this, I finally told him he couldn't be in it anymore, namely because I needed the car to live. It was the only way for me to get to places. Granted, it was a key reason I ended up doing the shopping for him a lot, and he'd pay me back later. He would often throw around anything he borrowed, and when it was his property, he'd treat it gently and preciously, as if it might crack from a gust of wind. He treated our apartment much the same way, not having any qualms about breaking or damaging things in it, because in the end he knew he wouldn't be the one to suffer for it. Next was his anger. Anything could set him off. His biggest thing was League of Legends. I think he got to Platinum in the end, maybe even Diamond 5 or at least really close. Almost daily I could hear him yelling, or screaming how someone was feeding, or someone was just bad. There was no way he can carry these scrubs, etc., etc., etc. But anything he could. He did not get along well with other people, though he ironically did have quite a few friends. None of them would spend extended time with him aside from me, however, and mostly it was just them playing MTG. There were dozens of times I swore he was going to break his keyboard, since I'd hear him pounding on things. He constantly got in trouble at work as well, because he'd take his anger out on our guests. Then came his, "If you do something for me once, you're a bad person if you don't do it for me always." If you gave him a ride one time, you'd better give him the same ride every time from then on, no matter the situation. If you didn't, you were a horrible person. After all, he was being nice enough to let you do his bidding. But the thing that took the cake, the thing that I couldn't stand, that eventually ended up giving me the realization I had to escape: the constant emotional abuse. I was not the most social person in the world. In fact, I'm still extremely awkward and have trouble even talking to people without going into a borderline panic attack. Though I have gotten better. He loved to use this against me. Anytime I disagreed with him on anything, I was nuts, crazy, or his favorite one: "Joel, you just don't think like a normal person." He'd rarely, if ever, attack the issue. It was always me who was a bad person for arguing. He'd try everything from throwing a tantrum to crying at me, to all but threatening me, as in towering over me and just glaring down. Keep in mind, he was about 3 times my size, and a lot stronger, so that was sometimes scary. He'd also tell me how all his friends thought I was crazy for having X viewpoint. I later found out that a lot of them actually did side with me. To give an example, he once asked for peanut butter. I grabbed chunky, he wanted smooth. He never told me he wanted smooth. He spent about a week harassing me about how anyone would have grabbed smooth, how I was nuts for it. But it was okay, because we were friends and he'd always be my friend anyway, so he'd forgive me for not being normal. He also liked to give nonverbal cues that what I did displeased him, which he knew I picked up on and felt guilty over. And then when I talked about it, he'd go, "What? I never said a word. You can't get mad at me for that." Granted, when I gave the same cues, he was all over me for it. He loved to brag about how good he was at games, and any kind of accomplishment I made always had some kind of underlying insult he had to fling out as to why it wasn't good enough, was a waste of time. "Oh well, people at your rank aren't that good. Oh, you want to do that kind of job? It's nearly impossible and a waste of time." I wanted to be a writer, actually have a few books I wrote, not successful though. So maybe he was right on that one. This also included things like I played X game. Waste of time. Pros wouldn't play it. I liked a certain show. Normal people don't like it. It wasn't usually a long-term harassment, just one little thing every time. He also did not like any other friends I made, getting extremely jealous of any I had, and often refusing to go near them. Probably the worst thing he did was the threats. He told me if I ever moved out, he'd eventually kill himself, since he had no one else. That one screwed with me a lot and was what made escape so difficult. Especially because I had a lot of issues from this due to my dad threatening to kill himself at least once or twice a week. The majority of our time together I ended up having to hide in my room because I was afraid something, anything I'd do, would end up setting him off and result in him guilt-tripping me or yelling at me. That's just the big stuff. I'm sure there was a bunch of little stuff. Sadly, I can't remember many stories. I mostly just remember the general things he did. Now this part is going to be about why I endured this behavior for years and how I escaped. Can go ahead and skip it. It's mostly just for therapeutic reasons, like the rest of the story, I suppose. I came from a rather emotionally abusive home. Now it's not so bad, since my parents have no power over me, so when they start I can just tell them no and get away. And I actually have a decent connection with my parents. But back then, it was horrible. I was one of those bullied kids, of course, who wasn't, to the point that I was finally taken out and homeschooled for most of my childhood, past 5th grade. Any sign of resistance or disobedience was shut down, hard, and making the people around me happy didn't just become the nice thing to do, it became the only means to survive my mother's constant and somewhat erratic behavior. While she wasn't physically abusive, anything could be used as an emotional weapon. She also seemed to have a lot of rather strong beliefs towards men, and I constantly received the verbal brunt of those. Our looks, personality, our intelligence, both me and my sister received constant criticism and insults, and in the end, it left me with an inability to actually argue with people about serious things. I still enjoy debates, but anything where someone is emotionally invested, and I completely shut down and get almost physically ill. An inability to displease those around me, just thinking someone is upset at me, makes me want to throw up, and a complete lack of self-confidence in myself. On top of that, I was transgender, and didn't find out until I was living with the roommate for about a year. So, just throw in a healthy dosage of physically hating my body, with lack of confidence and completely failing at any kind of social graces, and you get someone who thinks every horrible thing that happens to them is their fault, even when they had no control over it. What eventually clued me in to the issues with this behavior was my sister. While growing up, we didn't get along. The moment she was out of her mother's control, she became extremely protective of me, and is my biggest supporter during difficult times. She asked why I put up with his behavior, and until then I never even noticed what he was doing to me. I thought it was normal, that I deserved it. Sadly, it still took me years to realize how bad it was. But my sister's comments were the first thing that made me actually look and start to see what was going on. The thing that really turned me around, though, was finally seeking therapy for my depression. Over the course of a few visits, I went from thinking I was just weird to realizing that I was a cross-dresser to finally accepting that I was a trans woman. Sadly, it took almost another 2 years before I could do anything about it. Insurance issues suck. However, once I started realizing what I was and taking steps to correct it, my confidence began to soar, and I stopped putting up with more and more of his behavior. I finally realized I didn't trust him at all, which later proved to be right, so I never told him about me being trans until I was certain everyone else I wanted to know knew. By this point, he'd been out of town a few months. He literally had no one else in town and had to go live with his mother. My sister jumped at the chance to get me out of there and even had me stay a month at her place to get away from him. And it was like living a new life. I didn't have to walk on eggshells. I didn't have someone constantly harassing me and, most importantly, I felt like I was actually wanted. When I went back, I realized I had to escape and, with great difficulty, I managed to extract myself from him and let him know I wouldn't support him anymore. It cost me a lot of money, but it was so worth it to actually feel like a person again. Now the final part. Where are we now? Well, I've been on hormones for a year and I'm about to go full time. I have a ton more confidence and I'm actually a bit cute. Still horrible at social interactions and such, but I'm trying to get better. I managed to get my degree before we left. I finished a few books and have made a few online friends and have come to the point I actually do feel like a person. I've even started to look into dating, though I'm timid as heck and easily spooked by the slightest sign of abuse. Fortunately, my sister is by my side all the way, and has been an amazing support through my transition. I eat a lot better and managed to lose about 90 pounds. Gained 20 back, sadly. Need to lose about 90 more and I'll be my ideal weight. I can do it. Now Rage, on the other hand, lives in the middle of nowhere with his mom and spends all his days playing games. I think he's doing the best he can, and we do still have some contact. There don't seem to be any jobs out there, and I doubt he'll ever pay me back, but frankly, I just feel bad for him. I know he has a ton of self-hate and a horrible self-image, and part of me really, really wants to help him. But I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness in order to support someone else. And now I limit my contact with him. He has tried to guilt-trip me a few times, but nothing too major. 4. My roommate is a wackadoo. My roommate and I just don't see eye to eye. I've known for a while I want a new roommate when the lease is up. Lucky for me, she told me she wanted to move out because she hates our landlord. I never wanted to hurt her feelings by telling her I didn't want to live together, so when she told me on her own she was leaving, I jumped at the chance. I said, "No prob, I have a new roommate in mind. Just tell me when you have a new place." 6 weeks go by. New roommate asks me to find out if my current roommate has any leads yet. I text her to ask, but she says she doesn't. So I tell her, okay, I will tell my new roommate her move-in day is May 30th. That's when the lease ends, so naturally, my current roommate would have to get out by then. Unfortunately, she isn't logical. She lashes out.
"Well, what if I don't have anywhere to go? You're just kicking me out now? Leaving me homeless on the streets?"
No, crazy. That is how leases work. You leave when I sign with new roommate. But what I actually said was, Beth, you said you wanted to move out, so I'm going through with these new plans according to our last discussion. She then proceeded to call me, yell at me, call me a bad friend, childish, immature, etc. She hangs up on me, then comes home and says she wants to talk. She proceeds to ask me to sign the next lease by myself, and allow her to live there until she finds a place, if she does at all. No thanks, crazy, I don't need your verbal abuse. I tell her I have to think about it, and we can reconvene. I talked it over with a few friends who backed me up, and reminded me it wasn't fair for her to ask that of me. I am not obligated to her when the lease is up. Our landlord can't stand her, and won't let her re-sign the lease anyway, so I'm not going to lie and hide her out at the apartment. A few days go by and I break the news. Beth, when the lease is up, I will be signing with my new roommate. I am willing to work with you if you don't find a place by then, but my new roommate is moving in on the first day of the new lease. This did not go over well. She proceeded to text me more nasty things.
"You're not a Christian. You're so immature and fake,"
etc., etc. She called me, but I hit decline as I was at work. This followed with more nasty messages.
"Oh, you're playing games. You only want to talk when you want to. Grow up."
No, crazy. I'm at my job and I'm not going to fight with you over the phone. So I text back. I'm at work. I can talk later. She didn't like that, so more nasty texts. I then tell her I have to block her because of how hateful her words are. She then proceeds to send more mean words to my work email, which is embarrassingly going to be read by my managers. I reply, please email my personal email. That didn't stop her. More harassment. When I get home, we don't talk. It's 11 p.m., and I'm laying in my bed ready to sleep. She proceeds to yell at me through my door about how immature I am. I was trying to ignore her, but at this point, I blew up out of frustration. Beth, it's not all about you. Stop harassing me. I said I am not ready to talk. Leave me alone. She runs into her room and slams the door. Then comes out to blast the TV and her laptop and bang around all the cabinets so I can't sleep. The next morning, she has hid the remote so I can't watch TV. I buy a new remote on Amazon. Later, she pulls out the TV power cord and hides it so I can't watch. Finally, she pulled out the internet power cord and hid that too, so I can't use that either, even though I pay for Wi-Fi. Oh yeah, she threw away my wine and chocolate milk just because. Her biggest dig, which was sent through email,
"I didn't want to say this, but this is totally why you don't have a boyfriend. So immature. Oh really, you crazy idiot. Because the fact that I'm single has anything to do with the fight we are in. And I'm the immature one. Didn't you just hide the freaking TV and internet cables on me like a child, you baboon? This all happened in 1 week. 3 months till lease ends. 5. I've been subscribed to this sub for a little over a year. In that time, I've found that it's truly a terrific little alcove for commiseration, but I have to confess something. All this time I've been passively reading stories and sharing in the woes of others, without contributing any of my own. The truth is, I've been holding out on you guys. I'd like to think this will make for a worthwhile read, and that some benefit will come from reading it. That said, I've hesitated to share this story. The principal reason is that the roommate in question, M, is now paralyzed from the waist down. His paralysis came as a result of an accident. He operated a motorcycle while drunk. For that reason, I don't think of his crash in the same league as an unforeseen illness or a lightning strike. But it is tragic all the same. He's recovered a great deal since that time. However, he has permanently lost a significant amount of his mental faculties. And it is a reasonable certainty that he will never walk again. Telling this story will be therapeutic for me, and I also hope that it might serve as a cautionary tale for how quickly depression and eventually anger can lead one down the wrong paths in life. This story starts out when Em and I were friends. Em and I worked at a popular barcade. I'm sure you can probably guess which one, since there really aren't that many. I worked security, and Em was unfortunately underemployed as a host, even though he had several years of experience working as a server. After a surgery, I returned to work on pain medication, which left me feeling woozy and tired. Part of my responsibility was to construct and deconstruct parties for groups of 200 plus, assembling and disassembling tables, moving chairs and chaffers, and so on. Since I was still recovering, management had M help me with my work. He did an exceptional job, and carried the brunt of the weight for around 4 hours. During that time we chatted about our favorite shows, and found we both loved Aqua Teen. This was how we first met. We began going to a local dive bar together, a popular hangout for many of the employees at the barcade. It became customary for him and I to close the place down more than once a week. He lived very far away, so from time to time, I would give him a ride home, or at least drive him halfway to his connecting bus. We started hanging out outside of work. We went to concerts together. On one occasion we got stranded 20 miles outside of town after a show let out, and all of the taxis queued up had been taken. After walking a mile or so down the road, we called my sister at 4 in the morning. She made the hour drive to pick us up, only to get a flat a few miles down the road from us. We walked down, helped change her tire, and made it home at 5:30. During that night, we shared our minds openly. I felt like he and I would be friends for the rest of our lives. I respected him tremendously. What I should mention, however, is that only a few days after I met him, M's mom passed. She had been very sick, and had lived with him and his brother for a long time. M took care of her and loved her with all his heart. Her passing devastated him. On the night when she passed, he hugged me and sobbed into my chest, told me life wasn't fair, that he didn't understand how it could have happened. She was in her late 40s, very young. M had a hard time coping with her passing. He became surly, distant. That night after the concert was the last time I ever saw him smile. It was the last time we ever talked openly. It had been several months since her passing, but somehow I felt like that night was when reality all came together for him. Perhaps it was the frankness and openness of our conversation, or maybe it was something completely unrelated to me. Because he lost a lot of his memory in the accident, I will honestly never know. On that night, we decided we would get a place together. I was living with my mom at the time and was pretty depressed. I have a son, and this was all happening around the time his mother and I separated. I didn't feel like I was living up to my own potential, and I wanted to become the father figure I felt my son deserved. Getting my own place felt like the appropriate first step towards that endeavor. Em was enthusiastic to get a place closer to work. I should probably also mention that I no longer worked at the barcade anymore. I'd found a job at a local startup. We found an apartment complex 5 blocks from the heart of town, which seemed perfect for the most part. Close to a local public transport hub, close to the barcade, close to some terrific bike paths, and not too pricey. Also relatively spacious. The only downsides were the neighborhood was a little shady, and the building itself was fairly old, built in the 1960s just to give you an idea. With our combined income, we had enough to put a deposit down. Once we were paid, they gave us a unit number and told us it would be ready in a week. We'd cleared the first hurdle into adulthood. This is where things began to fall apart. The day of our move-in came. We hadn't set foot inside our unit yet, as they were remodeling it ahead of our residency. We had only seen comparable units. When we walked inside, we were greeted by some surprises. First, we were supposed to have a downstairs bathroom. The bathroom fixtures had been ripped out of the wall and replaced with the components for a washer-dryer hookup. I found this hilarious. Em found it infuriating. The floorboards in the house were warped, as was the ceiling. There were holes in the walls and doors, which appeared to have been punched by someone out of anger. The master bathroom looked like a murder scene. The fireplace wasn't functional. Someone had painted over the only functional phone outlet, rendering it useless. The list of problems went on and on. I took all of this in good humor, however, and wanted to try and make the best of it all. Em did not. He went over to the office and complained. Not a bad call, looking back, but he did so in defiance of me. After some discussion with the office staff, we elected to keep the unit. Em warmed up to the prospect of having a functional washer-dryer pair inside of the apartment. On the way back from the office, I recall he offhandedly mentioned something about wanting to get cats. Our first month in that house wasn't all that bad. We made some good memories and shared some fun evenings together. Em was still sad, however, and that sadness deepened the more time we spent in that house. One of Em's biggest frustrations in life was that he had never had a girlfriend. Em was, and remains, a very attractive man. He's around 6'1" and very muscular. He worked out 3 to 4 days a week and took excellent care of himself. He looked similar to Corbin Bleu, but with a goatee. I'm not sure why he had difficulty dating, but it became his biggest frustration in life. He spent many evenings with me lamenting his loneliness, telling me how badly he wanted a girlfriend. It depressed me, because I was in a similar situation. I felt lonely too, but complaining about it didn't seem to do much for either of us. Time went by. We found out that the smoke detector on the lower level was way too close to the kitchen. We also found out that my bedroom was directly above the heater, meaning either my bedroom was too hot or his bedroom was too cold. It was impossible to reach a happy medium. Really, quite ordinary stuff. What changed, however, was Em's unhappiness. His loneliness festered. He began hiring prostitutes, inviting them into our house. This is also where the details I'm about to share may sound implausible and comically exaggerated. I assure you, everything that follows is true to the best of my knowledge. A young lady came by our house one night, around 11 p.m. I was playing Demon's Souls in the living room when the doorbell rang. Odd, I thought. Em was very drunk at the time. He answered the door and went upstairs with her. 20 minutes later she came down and said, "See you tomorrow," on her way out. Em came down shortly after and lamented that she only danced for him. I put the pieces together, but didn't have the courage to say anything. He was bigger than me, and I'd seen him get violent before. I never did see her again. Come to think of it, I should probably clarify a couple pieces here. You see, about a month before we moved in together, I got a DUI. My second in under 5 years. A stupid mistake on my part, and one which I've since paid dearly for. Well, another story for another time. A week after, Em and I went to a concert, and afterwards went to our usual dive bar to hang out. While we were out front, Em picked a fight with a kid on a motorcycle who was trying to impress a girl. The kid and Em got pretty heated, but it was only words. I stood there smoking a cigarette against the wall and silently watched the situation unfold. Eventually, the kid said he wouldn't fight Em because it was 2-on-1. Evidently, he thought I was going to tag team him with Em. The kid pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and yelled something in Arabic into the receiver. Imagine the same way Tom Cruise yells at the leader of Flaming Dragon in Tropic Thunder. A minute goes by, I shit you not, and 6 kids roll up on different coloured motorcycles. A fucking rainbow of douchebaggery. They get off, yelling in Arabic again, and form a circle around Em and I, pinning us against the wall of the bar. I'm freaking out, and put my hands up to try to calm things down, when someone punches me in the nose. I go down, hard. I look up and see Em getting stomped in the spine by the original kid and 2 of his friends. I take a similar ass-kicking, and after spitting on us, the kids vanish like a fart in the wind. Em was not happy with how the situation turned out. After that night, he had a chip on his shoulder. He was always looking for an excuse to fight, wanting to prove himself, or make up for some perceived shortcoming on his part. Anyways, prostitutes. Lots of prostitutes. I counted 4 in the time that we lived together, but maybe there were more. One night, around 2 in the morning, his phone woke me up. It was ringing over and over. I went downstairs and picked it up because clearly somebody was either dead or giving birth. Em was passed out on the couch, his phone in his hand. When I answered, the girl said, "Hello, I'm here." I went to the door and she was standing outside on the patio. He'd ordered a prostitute and had gotten so drunk that he passed out before she arrived. From speaking to her, I gathered that he had done this already that same evening. That is, he called her around 9, passed out, woke up, called her around 1 and passed out again. I woke him up, they went upstairs and did their business. Pissed, I went back to bed. That entire cycle, being woken up, finding her out front, waking him up, going to bed pissed, repeated itself the following night. Like I was trapped in a shitty alcoholic version of Groundhog Day. Except the following morning, my Xbox was missing. I guess this is the part where he and I started to fall out. You see, that morning there were several things off about our apartment, more than just the Xbox. He had left his keys on the front porch, and the back door ajar. When the Xbox was stolen, I believed she, that is the prostitute, had taken it out of spite. He didn't think that was a fair conclusion to draw. Since one door was unlocked and the other was open, anyone could have taken it, making it somehow partly my responsibility. And come to think of it, didn't we have renter's insurance? That's right, we did. I called up the insurance company and gladly explained the situation. I had been robbed, and was requesting money to replace the stolen goods. Only one problem. When Em took out the insurance policy, which I had been paying him $6 a month for, he only put himself on the claim. By calling, I inadvertently excluded myself from eligibility for replacement by stating that the Xbox was mine and not his. Oh well, I was sure he would make things right. After some convincing, he agreed to recompensate me for the Xbox, but not for the 2 controllers that were taken, or the game that was inside the box, Titanfall. Quite fun if you've never played it. I went to GameStop and called him. He was to transfer money into my account. As I was standing in the queue, holding the Xbox and thinking, this is bullshit, but at least he's going to make things right, he called me and said, "Nah bro, I changed my mind. Sorry." I gave up on it, moved on. I ended up buying another Xbox a few months later, chose to cut my losses. Sometime after, he did take $100 off my half of the rent, so it wasn't like he completely gave me the shaft, but still not a pleasant experience. Another piece I should mention, when we were in that bar fight, my nose was broken. I didn't realize this for several months. I knew it was a little messed up, but I didn't think it was broken. I was having trouble breathing, so I went to a respiratory specialist. She told me that one of my nostrils was 90% deviated, and the other was 100% deviated. My cartilage had been scrunched into a Z shape when I had been punched. Surgery was relatively inexpensive, but it would leave me bedridden for a couple days. Okay, if it would help me breathe better, then I was all for it. You may recall a few paragraphs ago, I mentioned that M had candidly shared that he might want to get cats. When I came home from my surgery, we had cats. He hadn't consulted me. I'm not allergic, but I don't like cats. They shed everywhere, and they are generally not pleasant creatures to me. I prefer dogs, but that's beside the point. I was delirious and weak, but I remember his assurance to me, "The cats won't shed." It's been several years since he lived with me since the time of this accident, and I still, to this day, find clumps of those fucking cats' hair floating around the house from time to time. When they were there, the volume of hair was overwhelming. The cats loved my room, and my bed the most, probably because it was above the heater. As such, they did a thorough job of coating all of my belongings in a thin layer of fur. My bedding, my jackets, my clothes, my shoes, my games, my TV, my computer, clumps and tufts on my food, in my bathroom, in my hair. I understand if you're a cat person, and these sorts of things don't bother you, but to me I find a hairy living space to be unacceptable, bordering on uninhabitable. My surgery made me violently sick. The cat hair in my room that first night made it that much worse. If you've never vomited and sneezed at the same time, I would strongly recommend against it. It's not an experience worth sharing. Anyways, the cats were male and female, brother and sister. The male got sick at one point. He never got better. He sneezed these long, slimy boogers all over the house, on the couches, on the walls, and on my computer chair. They also used my computer chair as a scratching post. Fuck, I really hated those cats. M assured me he would groom them, care for them, give them the home they deserved. When he was in his accident, the cats had been with us for over a year. Their fur was so matted and clumped that a friend of mine who groomed pets on weekends recommended I shave the female rather than spend several days working out all the knots in her fur. Eventually my nose healed. It was great, I could breathe again. Only now I was breathing in a mixture of air and cat hair. You may recall earlier I mentioned I had gotten a DUI. We were now 6 months past that date. I had gotten to court and had pled guilty. Part of my sentence was 3 months of in-home detention, with an ankle monitor and a sensor connected to our phone outlet, the very same one the apartment renovators had painted over. As an aside, those were some very long months for me. I lost my job midway through because of a fight with a co-worker, and had tremendous difficulty seeking out new employment since I was under house arrest. But that's beside the point. Where M was concerned, nothing was to change. His daily lifestyle wouldn't be affected by my forced in-house detention. You see, M liked smoking weed. Not a problem by me. I am of the opinion that you should just let people do as they will. However, I was now under strict sobriety monitoring. 12 times per month I was to randomly submit a urine sample to show the court that I was sober. I should also mention that our apartment complex had a strict no marijuana policy, although we live in one of the states where recreational marijuana has been legalized. Perhaps you've already put the pieces together. M liked to smoke weed, in the house I should mention. I couldn't leave the house, and I was under sobriety monitoring. I asked him many times not to smoke in the house. In defiance of me, he filled the downstairs common area with smoke from floor to ceiling. It's frustrating, feeling trapped, feeling powerless. I explored several avenues, but none of them yielded a satisfactory result. My apartment's complex manager told me that, if he truly was smoking weed inside, we both would be liable if caught. My probation officer told me if my urine came up hot, I would be liable. The agency offering my ankle monitor told me I was legally bound to the residence I had provided for the duration of my monitoring. Legally, I could not move. I was well and truly trapped in there. I never did have any of my urine come up hot, but I resented him for every day I was made to worry, and for every occasion when I accidentally inhaled some second-hand smoke and thought, fuck, that's it, I'm truly screwed. Look it up, by the way. Second-hand smoke will most certainly cause your urine to show up positive. Time went on. While I was under monitored observation, M decided he wanted a weightlifting set. He purchased a bench and an Olympic bar off a guy on Craigslist, and had them delivered to our 1,200 square feet home the following day. I had been out looking for jobs. If you're interested to know, when under monitored detention, you have to have someone sign a piece of paper affirming that you were wherever you said you were whenever you left home. So in this instance, I had to have the interviewer sign a piece of paper, beneath several other names of interviewers all affirming their understanding that I was a criminal and had to report my whereabouts to someone at all times. Suffice to say, I didn't get a call back. When I came home to find the weight set being delivered, fuck, I was really, truly mad. Not because it took up 1/3 of our entire living room, but because it was incredibly inconsiderate. My son was 1 year old at the time. An Olympic gym set is not something you leave around a baby. It's just not a good idea. Dropped weights, squished fingers and toes. Call it a recipe for disaster. Couple that with the fact that M liked to smoke cigarettes and weed while he lifted weights, and the whole situation really drove me up the wall. Eventually I got my ankle monitor off. Around that time, a young lady came to live with us. She slept in the area downstairs. She was a bit of a character, and if I had time I would probably write a story about her titled The Second Worst Roommate I've Ever Had. But she's not the focus of this story. M is. M and this young lady liked to drink together. At the time, I was entirely sober, so I observed their drinking from a fair distance. On one occasion they shared a bottle of wine. The following morning, someone had vomited on one of the couches downstairs, and surreptitiously covered the vomit with a box. I spoke to both of them, and it became apparent that it had been M. That vomit stayed on that couch, under that box, for 6 months. It left with the couch at the time of M's accident. Who knows, it may still be there to this day. As a matter of principle, I refused to clean it up. Similarly, roughly 1 week before his accident, one of the cats broke a glass plate on our mantel. I did end up cleaning that glass. However, I did so only because I knew the glass would remain there if I didn't. Anyways, returning to the chronology of events. We had a falling out with our female roommate. M put all of her stuff on the curb. The female roommate blamed me. I didn't do anything to stop him, granted, but she had a lot of stuff. It had taken him an hour and a half to move all her stuff out. I later came to find out he had been withholding her mail, specifically a termination check from her former employer. She, in turn, had been hiding his weights around the house. I found one of them buried in the closet a few months ago. Gave me a nostalgia trip. I woke up on many nights to the sound of weights clanging. Bang! Several seconds would go by. Bang! He would lift weights, sometimes at 2 or 3 a.m. He would also pump music through his speakers, with a deep bass. It was a wonder our neighbors never complained. M cooked one evening. I don't know what. What I do know is that in a state of drunken forgetfulness, he left a plastic spatula on the stovetop. That spatula almost burned our apartment down. I woke up, encircled in a cloud of thick smoke, ran downstairs and hurled the flaming spatula out the front door. Whenever he cooked bacon, he dumped the grease out the front door onto the rocks next to our patio. My son took to calling them the greasy rocks. At the time they were adopted, the cats were not litter box trained. He did a haphazard job of teaching them. For some reason, they took to pooping on my bathroom mat. Whenever I left the bathroom door open, they wasted no time in pooping there. It happened 4 times. He cleaned the mat the first time, rolled it up and threw it in a closet the second time. I found that rolled up, shit-encrusted mat when he moved out. I bought a new mat, and cleaned it myself the 3rd and 4th time. His friends were assholes. One of them took a dump in our kitchen trash can. Another brought meth to a party at our house. My son was there that night. Fuck them. Speaking of, the worst thing Em ever did in my mind was yell at my son. It only happened once, but I have never been so thoroughly filled with rage. My son was opening and closing one of the bathroom cabinets while I got his bath ready, slamming it, in all honesty. Not a pleasant noise, but certainly not terrible either. It was around 11 in the morning, just to give you an idea, and Em was sleeping. My son slamming the cabinet must have woken him up. He came to the bathroom, slammed in response on the door, and yelled, "What the fuck is wrong with you? Who the fuck do you think you are?" He jiggled the door handle trying to open it. At this point, he may not have been certain that it was my son slamming the cabinet. I yelled back, "Sorry, he was just playing." He was now certain. He yelled back, "Tell your son to quiet the fuck down." My son was 2 years old. In that moment, as he looked at me, I saw nothing but terror and confusion in his tiny eyes. He had meant no harm, and he had been yelled at by Em, whom he liked, who made him laugh from time to time and was an adult in his world, someone he trusted. That was the point in my mind where I stopped viewing Em as a human being. From that point on, he was merely the thing that yelled at my son. There are other stories similar to the sort of story I've already shared, a laundry list of incidents, but I think the ones I've shared here paint a fairly complete picture. Em was in his accident not long after that. He had been drinking PBRs and JMO with one of our neighbours. 2 weeks prior, he had purchased a crotch rocket. I came home and passed him on the way out. Our door was swollen from the summer humidity. As he tried to open the door, he said to me, "We need to get that door fixed." Those were the last words he spoke to another person for 3 months. He took the crotch rocket down a service road near our complex, going 95 on a road with a 30 miles per hour limit. He lost control of the bike around 1.5 miles from our complex, and collided directly with a wall separating the service road from the freeway. His spine snapped. His skull would have been pulverized if he hadn't been wearing a helmet. Seriously, if you're reading this and you own a motorcycle, wear a fucking helmet. It will save your life. My sister drove me down that same road 20 minutes later, taking me to a bike shop to get my bike repaired. The road had been blocked off, but as we were entering a side alley to go around the traffic stop, she noticed Em's motorcycle. We got out and thankfully were able to identify him. Em had been driving without a license, and the bike was registered to the original owner. They had no way of knowing who he was. Em spent 3 days in the ICU. Until that 3rd day, it wasn't clear if he would survive. When his condition stabilized, he remained in a medically induced coma. The coma lasted for nearly 2 weeks. Then he woke up. I watched his father cry in the hallway of the hospital, a huge and imposing man, shaken to his core by reality. For the first few months, he was like Drew Barrymore in 50 First Dates, trapped living the same daily experiences and having the same reactions to seemingly new stimuli. Except his memory looped every 5 minutes. He was 31 at the time of the accident, but believed he was 28. The most unfortunate consequence of all this was that he still believed his mother was alive. If her name came up, he would have to be gently reminded of her passing. Each time he would be so unbelievably crestfallen. Disbelief and confusion would consume him. A few minutes later, the memory would be gone, and he would regain a relatively happier demeanor. I visited him most days for the first month after his accident. As is generally the case, my visits became less frequent. He moved hospitals several times. Eventually, he was moved to a retirement home not far from where I lived. Em has a tube in his stomach to remove waste. He has adapted to using a wheelchair. It's been close to 2 years since his accident, and his memory is starting to come back. Things are sticking. New names and new faces are imprinting on his mind. He moved out of the hospital last month and lives with his brother. It was a difficult situation for his brother, since he had been their mother's caretaker before her passing. He's young too, 26 or 27, I believe. He's now cared for 2 family members. I have unbelievable respect and admiration for him on that account. Anyways, that's the whole story. I hope it means something to you who read it all the way through. I guess the epilogue would be that M's family moved all of his stuff out, including the gym equipment. He owed a month of back rent at the time of the accident, which the barcade generously ended up paying. They have a really cool outreach program for employees who experience hardship. I still visit him from time to time, but it's difficult. He likes me, and he's happy to see me. He has no memory of yelling at my son. But I do. I always will. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Bad Roommates number 2. I've been meaning to get one of these done, well, for quite a while now, since not long after I did the last one, but it took me a while to find the stories I wanted to use, and that people would give me permission to use, because there's always stories I want to use that people either say no or they just don't check their Reddit account or something. Well, hopefully it was worth the wait. It's a bit of a beastly size, I know, but you don't have to listen to it all at once. Bit late to mention that now, but there it is. Really should have put that at the start of the video, shouldn't I? Silly Hellfreezer. I'm slapping myself on the wrist. Won't do it again. Except the next time I do a really long video and forget to remind people, you don't have to watch it all at once. This is the ASMR section of the video, so get your pillows and your candles, and I don't actually know how to do ASMR, so I'm just going to go now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.